Hello, my name is LaShawn, and I am the founder of Let's Get Social. And we are here because we're going to be sewing live Simplicity 9757. So I'm excited to sew this. This is a really quick sew, very beginner friendly. So let's get into it. All right. So we are actually going to start with a skirt. There are three skirt pieces. There are three skirt pieces. There is a front, a back, and then there is a casing for the elastic. So I did something a little bit different this time in that instead of cutting two on the fold, I actually cut one on the fold and I cut one, but I divided it into two pieces. And really what that does is it allows me to be able to create a little bit more cuffing around the back portion of the skirt. It also allows me to be able to create a slit in the back. So as you'll see right here, this is the actual outfit that we'll be making. This is the skirt, this is the top, and it comes naturally with a slit on the side, which you can't see here because the camera doesn't capture it. But there is no ability to have a slit in the back based on the way the pattern is cut. So by having a fold in the back, it also allows for a slit in the back, but it also allows me to be able to take in the back a little bit more, which is something that I determined I needed when I created the first version. I did cut it in a medium, and I also cut this in a medium as well. The top was true to size; the measurements did add up, but the skirt it did fit, and it did fit true to size, but it was a little loose for what I normally like. So that's why I cut the skirt a little bit differently this time. So with that said, I am going to actually start sewing. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I am going to take the two sides of the skirt. Again, this is not in the instructions, but I am going to stitch these together. And I'm going to pair right sides together, which is going to be a little bit easy to do because let me just make sure I match up my notches. A little notch there. Make sure I have my notch on this side as well. And it's interesting. There we go. And I think this is going to give me a little bit more of a fitted skirt, which is exactly what I want. Exactly what I want. So I'm going to use clips to pin this together. And I'm debating as we're pinning this whether I want to create a slit in the back. I am thinking I'm not going to do it. Yeah, I think I'm not. But that is an option that I have. Or it will be, or it was, I guess would be the right language to use because once I stitch this, I will no longer have that option. Unless I seam rip. So again, this is not in the original instructions, but I am doing this because it does give me the option to do some adjustments in this back part. And so I'm going to see how it works out with, removing basically about an inch of seam allowance by creating or cutting this back piece into two. So when you do that, you basically eliminate about a half an inch of seam allowance. Or no, maybe it's actually about an inch. It is about an inch of seam allowance. So I might actually stitch this at less than 5/8 because what I don't want is it to be too small. So here we go. I'm going to do it closer and maybe about a fourth. We'll see how that goes. And again, I'm going to do 1/4, keeping this really narrow because you can always, use a serger or add another stitch to make it smaller if you need it. And I'm going to use a straight stitch for this. Any vertical stitches, I'm going to use a straight. And if I do a horizontal stitch, I will do a zigzag, a narrow zigzag stitch. All right. And I'm actually, before I press the seams, I am actually going to put right sides together and stitch the front to the back. And again, this is a really beautiful fabric. And I will be doing this at 5/8 on each side. And again, because I'm doing a vertical stitch, I will also do this with a straight stitch. Okay, one side. I'm going to actually pin the other side because I like to do all my pinning, or clipping in this case, which is my preference. And then I go and sew. So the other thing I do need to remember is, because I've taken some length out of the skirt, or width I should say, then I also will have to make that adjustment to the casing or the waistband. I'll have to remember. So what I'll probably do is just hold it up to the skirt and make some cuts on each end, just to make sure it lines up so that it is not way too big for the skirt waistband. All right, so just lining up these raw edges. The other thing I really like about clips is that they don't come out. So what I found early on in my sewing journey or career is that, if you want to call it a career, but my sewing journey is that, when I was using pins, they were falling out left and right. Now, I didn't have a lot of experience, so it could have been other things I was doing wrong, but I quickly said there's got to be an alternative. And clips have been my favorite ever since. All right, all of the clips are in, and now it is time to do the stitch. And I'm going to do about a 1/2 inch. So instead of 5/8, I'm actually going to do a 1/2 inch. Again, it's always easier to make it smaller. You got to use that seam ripper to make it bigger. Serger can be your friend in this case if you want to make it smaller quickly. One side done. And now we're gonna flip it over and do the other side. This skirt, like I said, it is really a simple sew. In addition to, the fabric, there are some notions that you need, and it includes some 1/4 inch elastic as well as some 1 inch elastic. The 1/4 inch elastic goes in the top to create a ruching on the side, which I'll show you in a minute. And then the 1 inch elastic goes in the casing in the waist. We're going to do a quick back stitch. And just like that, we have finished stitching the entire body of the skirt. And I know you can't really see this well, but it's done. Okay, so that brings us to the next step, which is the casing. And so this is the other fabric that I'm using. It is it's not a floral design, but a very abstract design, and it complements this green beautifully. So I'm going to turn this skirt on right side out. The other thing too is that I did not create any of the slits in this skirt. So this again calls for a slit, but I stitched in this version all the way down. So I did eliminate all of the slits. Okay. So the casing has two pieces. There are two pieces. And on one of the ends, you're actually going to keep a small section open when you pin it together, because that's the section that you are going to slide the elastic in through. So before we even deal with that, I'm going to move this ironing pad out the way. I'm going to line these two pieces up. And I am going to see if I actually even need to cut any piece off, because so for whatever reason, this one's a little bit longer. So I am going to take my fabric scissors, make sure this is lined up. I'm going to cut this extra piece off, a little extra piece. There we go. I'm just evening it out. All right, there we go. So I cut that. And so I feel like it's going to fit perfectly, because the other thing that I'm going to do is just see. All right, there we go. That is perfect, because once I stitch these two pieces together, it will line up perfectly. All right, and then the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create or add the markings for where I need to keep this open. And I'm going to do it on both sides. All right. And I'm actually going to mark here too, so I know where to pin these. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to right sides together. Then we're going to stitch these to create the entire waistband. And again, I'm probably, even though this is stretchy, I don't want to stretch it too much. So I'm going to probably use a 1/2 inch instead of 5/8 for my seam allowance. Let me make sure. And this actually, I probably have to mark it up again, but it's okay. The important part is to make sure that you leave a little section open so that you have a space to slide the elastic. Okay, so again, It's normally 5/8, but I am going to do a half to ensure, just because I don't want my fabric to get sucked down, so I need to have adequate fabric. And actually, so one end I'm closing all the way up, do a little back stitch. And then the other end, I have to leave open a small section. And there we go. So we have stitched the band together, and now we are going to turn it on the right side, but we're also going to fold it in half. And you're going to fold it matching up, you know, the raw edges. And normally I would cut the seam allowance, but it's very narrow, so there really isn't. And actually, let me see, maybe I will cut a little bit, because this seam allowance will get in the way when you're trying to thread your elastic through. And I'm sure we've all dealt with that. So this is, I pretty much cut it off. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Cut it off. Make sure that when we are going to put our seam allowance in, we don't have any problems. And this will ensure that. Okay, seam allowance cut. We have a little hole in there to put in the elastic. Should not be a problem. It's literally a 1-inch hole, so we should be good to go. And then I'm folding this in half. Wrong sides facing. Here we go. Just want to line it up a little bit. And sometimes it can be helpful to do a basting stitch to keep your band together. In this case, I'm just going to clip it really good, but just know if you are having some problems keeping all of the raw edges together, you can put a basting stitch in your band, and that will help you make it a little easier for you to attach. So you do have some notches that you have in the front and the back of your top of your skirt, and you also have notches in your band, and it helps to line those up. And you may have to do some easing in. I usually start by lining up the side seams, and then I work to ease everything else in. Open up your seams on the side. It just helps it all to lay flush. And then I take clips and I start clipping. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. Other side seam. Oh, where's my other side seam? I could find it. Oh, guess what? This is why it's good to do that, because the front was to the side, and that's why I couldn't find the two side seams. So there's a middle seam in the back in my case. Now again, just as a reminder, I cut in half the back skirt piece. So I have a seam in the back, which allows me to do some additional adjustments. But if you are following the instructions exactly, you will be cutting two skirt pieces, the front and the back, on a fold, so you will not have a seam in the back. So the front and the back will look identical. Okay, so you are, again, lining up the side seams, clipping, and then I usually pin in the middle. Again, you have some notches. And I did notches in the skirts, I had little cutouts, and then I did markings in place of the notches on the waistband fabric. And I'm just clipping, making sure that the raw edges are all lined up. Raw edges of the band and raw edges of the skirt, all lined up. And there have been times where I've done a basting stitch on the band before attaching, just to help me hold it all the pieces together. I don't feel like I need to do that. Okay. And so here's where it's, again, the skirt is a little looser. You may have to do some stretching. And it does help to, again, line those notches up. It just makes sure that you don't end up with too much fabric on one side. Okay. I feel like this is pretty well lined up. So now I'm going back. And because this is a horizontal stitch, it's going across, I'm going to use a narrow zigzag stitch. So I have it set to 1.5 on my machine, which again is a very narrow stitch, very narrow zigzag stitch. It's going to ensure that I'm retaining the highest amount of stretch within that waistband, because the straight stitch will eliminate some of that stretch, and that's not what I want. So again, here we go, putting this in. I am going to sew this at 5/8, and let me just make sure before I do where my opening is. Okay, there we go. I'm going to make sure I have my opening where I'm going to slide that elastic in, that I'm not accidentally going to stitch over it. There we go. Sometimes, to make sure those seams get under and don't get crumpled as they're going under the presser foot, sometimes you have to hand roll the needle down and then lift the presser foot up and lay down that fabric. And that's it. So this is the top of the skirt. It's green, and it has the colored waistband. The seams are lining up, which is perfect. And now I am going to add, the elastic. And the way that I like to add the elastic is I like to measure it around my own waist. And what do I like that's comfortable? So I will measure it around my own waist. And I'll give it a little bit of stretch. What do I like comfortably? But you also want to make sure that, again, you have enough where you can get it on. But I'll stretch it around myself a little bit, and then I'll cut. I want to cut the wrong one. All right. And I'm actually going to use a safety pin to fish this through. So I'll put a safety pin on one end. And sometimes you can put a safety pin on the other. I just put a little clip on the other because it won't go through. And then I'm going to just put it through the hole, and I will fish it through. And this is really a simple task to fish it through with a safety pin, but you can also use this looping device. I'll just lay it down so you can maybe see it a little bit better. It comes in different lengths. It has a little hook on the end in which you can use to loop through an edge of the elastic, and then you can just fish it through. So that's another option. And so sometimes I use that when I don't have a small enough safety pin. And so we'll see that when we get to the ruching on the side of the top. Here we go. Let's pull this through. And we are almost finished fishing it through. Here we go. And I just like to make sure that the elastic is not twisted around inside of the band. And I can do that by just running my arms or my fingers along the band, and I can feel that there's no bunching. I leave a little bit of the edges out on each end, and then I overlap them. So create an overlap, kind of lining both of them, maybe like 3/4 of an inch, a half of an inch, and I lay it under the sewing machine. And I use that same zigzag stitch to go back and forth a few times. And I tend to create 2 rows of stitches just to give it a little extra security. And there we go. And, oh, did I not cut that? I did, okay. And then I just pull it right in. And then I will go back later off camera and do a slip stitch to close this, the hole where I have the elastic, where I entered the elastic. It'll be really quick. There's already a little overlap. So I'll just slip stitch and close that. You will not even know it's there. So I'll try this on towards the end. And then the other thing that I will do is I will create a hem in the bottom. And I will either use my serger and go around the edge and then fold and do a narrow hem, or I will iron up a half an inch and then turn it down 1/4 of an inch. Either one of those, and then do a narrow hem. So with that, the skirt is actually finished. So we're gonna move on to the next part, which is the top. And the other thing, what you're not seeing me do here, which I also tend to do, is I do tend to press my seams, and I will press that skirt. But just for the purposes of going through this, I am moving along through those steps. But know that each time that you create a seam, you should press the seam to help seal the stitches and help to lay the seams flat. Again, I'm skipping those steps during this tutorial, but you should definitely press those seams.